Hello, I'm Steve Hassan, and I'm absolutely delighted to have my friend and colleague Christine Marie Cadus with us. And Christine, you and I met first in 2014 at a ICSA cult conference in Washington, D.C. for a panel that I was involved with talking about human trafficking as a cult phenomenon.
Yeah,
And you and I both graduated from Fielding with doctorates, and you in media psychology. So we want to
mhm.
talk about your dissertation in a few minutes. But let's go back to what of your story has brought us to discuss the things we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I am a survivor of cult-based sex trafficking. And after, over a decade, I decided, I'm healed enough. I have something to say to the public about women who have been manipulated or deceived or coerced by these pseudo-religious movements. And I wanted to share my story so that other women would feel more comfortable coming out with their stories because there's a lot of self blame and a lot of victim shaming on women who have been in a cultic situation, whether it's a one on one relationship or part of a group. And women are often sexually exploited in this, under these circumstances. That was my motive in going public with my story. And I was on a reputable network with reputable producers. They even showed me a treatment of how the story was going to go. And so I felt confident that my very fragile survival, my very fragile survivor story coming out for the first time in full would be handled with sensitivity. But instead, I was dehumanized. I was victim blamed. My words were edited over reenactments. So it looked like I said entire sentences that I never said.
Mm-hmm.
But my head was saying, they focused in on my head. I'd say a few words. Then there would be the reenactment footage where they would grab words from another place. And you can't tell that it was so seamless, but it made me look absolutely ridiculous. And they misrepresented me in such enormous ways that the hatred towards me after the episode aired was like 800% more than any concern about my predator or the fact that I had been raped and beaten and robbed and had all these cruel things against me. They focused on the fundamental attribution error.
Mm-hmm.
How could I have fallen for this? They focused on my flaws, and I was just beside myself. And it was the biggest blow. Being publicly humiliated and misrepresented like that, it did create suicidal ideation in me.
Mm-hmm.
And it it was so huge and difficult for people to understand that even my therapist didn't really know how to help because it's permanently on the internet. This is the
Right.
digital age. So I found a way to repurpose my pain and my experiences by going back to school. I already had an MBA, but I decided to go back to school and get a PhD in media psychology and learn to do scientific research on the experience of being publicly shamed, misrepresented, canceled, humiliated, experiencing online cruelty of any form, revenge porn, false accusations, you name it. This is what I've done a deep dive on this. I researched it for my doctoral dissertation, but I'm still researching.
Mm-hmm.
So that experience of having been trafficked in a cultic situation and then completely misrepresented is what launched me to where we are today.
Yeah, so I just want to restate with power, you were traumatized and abused and trafficked. You got to a place where you understood what had happened to you. You wanted to share that experience with the public to educate them so they would have more sensitivity to other people who had been trafficked and to understand more about mind control. And
Right.
you were basically used and abused again by media that were sensationalizing. And you used a technical term I want to explain for a minute, fundamental attribution error. That is a social psychology concept that says that when people are trying to understand other people, they have a bias against the person, or they make it their disposition versus the context and the social influence variables, which is what you and I have come to understand is what's really going on here. And you did an amazing dissertation, because I read it, showing that there is media malfeasance that's causing real harm, real trauma, as you were mentioning, shaming, canceling, where people are coming out of the woodwork and just doing irreparable harm on vulnerable folks.
Right. It's media. Let's operationalize that. Media is traditional media, news, print, magazines, radio, television, film, music, and it's also social media, software, video gaming, technology. So media, when
Right.
we talk about media today, it's primarily referring to things that are on the screen, digital media.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be on a television show today without it also being permanent on the internet somewhere. I mean,
Right.
it's a crossover.
Right. And I want to say, just because I've been so involved with QAnon the last few months, researching it, talking with former believers, former members of that cult, that so many people think they're going to stop trafficking, and yet they've been radicalized and indoctrinated into their own thing, and they've lost media literacy, and but more importantly, they've lost their sense of conscience and compassion for fellow human beings. The point that I want to make with this video interview and our blog is to really share, in a sense, survivors' perspectives who've actually learned about brainwashing and mind control and authoritarian control, and in particular with the subject of trafficking and wanting to help children, wanting to help women and men who've been trafficked. We need to have a different perspective based on humanity, based on morality, based on conscience. And so I want to invite you to tell us what you want, the messages you want to share with the way you're seeing reality right now in the United States. We're doing this interview now, the end of February of 2021.
Well, it seems as if the United States is has become acutely aware of human trafficking and everyone has a heart to save the children, especially with the media campaigns on the blogs and in the underground about child trafficking. Everyone wants to jump in and save those children, including myself. Who does not want to save a child from trafficking? But what I have seen is that because people are so naturally inclined to want to help these children, it's easy to raise money. I've seen, a number of bogus charities crop up under the premise that they're helping victims of child trafficking when they are not. So that is one issue I have. Another issue is that people need to understand trafficking. It involves a commercial end result. It is about making money. If a child is being harmed, that falls under child abuse or kidnapping or child rape. If an adult is in an abusive situation, that's interpersonal violence. But we are watering down the real issue when we try to lump everything under the term human trafficking so that charities can raise money. So I have an issue with that.
Right. So let's be clear. There are legitimate anti-trafficking
Right.
organizations with accountability and financial responsibility that truly are helping victims, survivors of trafficking, wanting to do preventive education. I'm involved with the Ending the Game program that helps women understand pimp mind control techniques. But there are bogus groups like QAnon saying we're going to help trafficking, but they do nothing but recruit to make money for themselves. And
Right.
there are groups like my former cult, the Moonies, that do trafficking themselves on the members, or Scientology, in my opinion, does trafficking, labor trafficking. So the public needs to not just hear the word, but actually look at proof and who's legitimate and who's not legitimate, who's really doing something practical to help.
Right. And the voice of survivors is very important. If it's a legitimate organization, in my opinion, if somebody wants to hear from a survivor, that message will go to the organization and then they will give survivors an opportunity to tell their story or not. Something I have trouble with is when the organization just says, I'm sorry, we're not going to exploit our survivors. And the reason I have trouble with that is because it's healing to tell your story if your story is told right, and it's not exploitation if it's healing. And it's a convenient way to stop people from doing due diligence when you say you can't talk to any of our survivors. I'm a survivor. If somebody wants to hear my story, I am happy to tell it.
Right.
It when I think of any of my survivor friends, they're the same. So if they cannot bring up a single survivor ready to talk, that's a red flag to me.
Yeah, don't donate to anyone that hasn't really passed the sniff test. And if
Right.
anyone wants to contact Christine or me and say, "What do you think of this or that?" If we don't know about the group, we can ask our network of people that we do know and trust
Right.
about
And
this group.
just like there is a lot of misrepresentation about human trafficking in the media. For example, if we think about the film Taken, it was riveting and everybody was on the edge of their seat, and that type of thing can happen. But over 90% of the people who are trafficked through psychological chains. They're not kidnapped, they're not held hostage, and they're adults. So,
Well, a
it
lot
might,
of people are taken in while they're underage. That's true, and there is people who are taken in when they're adults as well.
right.
Clearly.
But the heart is naturally inclined to want to blame people that have aged out. If
Mm-hmm.
they're over 18, they should know better somehow, even if that has been their culture. Or, plenty of people who are adults get sucked into cultic groups or trafficking situations as well. And they get less attention because they don't fall under the stereotypical model like expressed in the movie Taken, where somebody's kidnapped and literally held.
Right.
So
Got it.
lots of forms of trafficking.
Right. So, what I'd like to do next is ask you to summarize what you did for your dissertation, what you found out, and offer some recommendations for what, if people have experienced this media trauma, as well as what possible solutions.
Okay, so my dissertation is called The Traumatic Impact of Media Humiliation, Misrepresentation, and Victim Shaming on Narrative Identity and Well-Being. What I learned in my research is that humiliation is the most intense human emotion. Humiliation is it's more long lasting than physical torture. When they interviewed prisoners of war who had been physically tortured, they described that they could not relive the physical torture. They could remember it, but what stayed with them was the psychological torture, because psychological torture, and that includes humiliation, it takes place in the brain. There's something called the physical pain, social pain overlap theory, because it social pain is in the same part of the brain as physical pain. That's where it's experienced.
Hmm.
When you have a childbirth, it hurts like hell. But
You know, because you're a mom.
I sure do. But you remember the pain, you don't relive it. When you are publicly shamed or humiliated, the wound is in here. So you get one new comment and it can reactivate all those memory networks and you relive it again and your brain is on fire and all your nerve endings are activated and you're sick and you can't function, and all the symptoms of PTSD or even complex PTSD kick into gear. People say, what's the big deal? Just block them, just ignore that. If somebody is subjected to an online harassment campaign or cyber bullying, a cyber mob, or
Cancer culture on the
cancel
left or the
culture,
right.
that's right. The experience to the human being is an anguish that is deeper and more long lasting than a physical assault. Now, I say this based on the results of my studies. I took 2 trauma surveys. My study was included 2 trauma surveys that I had my participants take.
Mm-hmm.
What they didn't know is that I had taken trauma surveys that were normally used for survivors of rape.
Mm-hmm.
I modified the words, so instead of saying sexual assault, I said media experience. Other than that, these surveys were measuring the levels of dehumanization, objectification, humiliation, and exploitation. It
Mm-hmm.
measured also what's called the centrality of events. How enormous was this experience in your life? Like when you survive a rape, it's not uncommon to get post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And and to see the world with that trauma as a fulcrum or a dividing point, like life before and life after. It's the same with cultic experience too, life before and life after. How central was that event? So measuring comparing this media humiliation, public shaming, canceling experience to a physical assault is appropriate. Do you know why? Because just like rape, it is a crime of power, making somebody feel powerless, making somebody feel dehumanized, making somebody feel like an object and like they're just there to be exploited by somebody else. There are similarities. And in my own experience, having survived, you know, the rapes involved in sex trafficking and having experienced the public shaming of the media humiliation and the social media bludgeoning, I will say that the worst experience of my entire life was not being trafficked. It was being publicly shamed
By the media.
by the media,
Yeah.
without question.
Yep.
Because look, if with a physical
Makes
assault,
sense to me.
yeah, a physical assault is in the past. In the present, you can work on healing. You can work on dealing with the triggers. You don't live in this fear that it's going to happen every single day. But with a public shaming, in my case, it was like they took what my trafficker started, the desire to make me feel powerless and humiliated and uh, small. They took what he started privately, and then they broadcast it and completed the humiliation process on many television networks. And
Yep.
the woman and the story that I see or that you see, that was not me or my story. But you don't, the average viewer doesn't know that.
Right. So how did you, other than, dedicating so much of your time and energy to researching this and speaking out about it, can you share any insights into how you coped with this horrible thing that happened?
Yeah, and I also included strategies that my participants used in my
Okay.
dissertation, what
Great.
helped them. So, how I coped, it wasn't easy. I was really, I really couldn't make sense of it at first. The important thing is to find a way to give your tragic experience meaning, to integrate it into your life story and realize this is who I really am. What these shamers are saying is not me. They're shaming somebody they don't know. When you're attacked by the cyber mob, you're basically, it's like being attacked by a giant cult in a way,
Yeah.
because it they don't know you, but they're shunning you, and they're all involved in groupthink. I
Yeah,
do
and you're like
believe.
an object. I mean, I have it all the time, honestly, where people are accusing me of all kinds of things. They have no idea who I am as a human being.
And that is one of the indicators of humiliation, because when you're not seen as a full and complete human being, then you're seen as as like a monster, an object, an animal. You're not seen accurately, and that is a violation of our dignity. So if somebody is judged based on a one bad event they did or a few bad actions that they did that they might regret or they might not, but if their entire life is now summarized by those mistakes, that person feels as if everything else in their life that they accomplished, that they felt proud of, all of those symbolic moments of meaning were disconnected. They're invalidated, they're turned off, because the public has decided this is who you are, this is all you are. We're not going to look into the fact that you're a wonderful father, or that you
Exactly.
really worked hard, on the Black Lives Matter movement, or that, all the good things that you did. They will focus on really the words of the unknown authority, because many times even cancellation movements don't have a single authority like in a cult. So that's where it's different.
Right.
But it's the pressure of the group to participate, because you fear you will be shunned if you do not. I have people contact me all the time because I talk about public humiliation, and when I say all the time, I mean practically daily. I
Mm-hmm.
hear stories of people who have been humiliated one way or another using media and technology. And I have been heartbroken by the number of stories that I have heard about people being attacked for things they did not do, rather for refusing to stand up and attack somebody else. So in other words, if you don't participate in the cancellation of this person, that must mean that you agree with all the things that person said, and then you're next.
Right. So I just want to say, for those who don't know my history, um, I have been accused of kidnapping, beating, torturing, and raping people to deprogram them out of cults. And this has been going on for 45 years. There are pages on the internet by Scientology, for example, with total fabrications. And there's nothing I can do about it. It's on the internet. And if people contact me and say, what about the stuff on this page? They made it up to keep their members disbelieving that I really know what I'm talking about. Okay? It's negative PR, or they call it dead agent packs, like how to kill off the credibility of somebody by creating disinformation and propaganda, mailing it to employers, giving it out to neighbors to shame you, to humiliate you, to get you to stop. And I've basically just, it hasn't made me stop, but it has hurt when anyone ever takes that seriously. And
Oh,
in
of
my
course.
work, when former members need help, but they're afraid to talk to me because they have this in their mind and they haven't reality tested, it harms them too.
Right. It is so hurtful to go through this because you say, I didn't deserve this. Even if you did a crime, you know, people go to jail, they go to prison, they call them correctional facilities. Are people being corrected? The goal today is transformative justice. We want to have we want to replace the systems that don't work, that continue to marginalize and oppress people,
Right.
with systems that do work. And when you create a public shaming campaign against somebody, or a propaganda slander cyber mob to take somebody down whose ideology you do not agree with, then you're not setting the stage for a transformative system,
No.
because you're labeling somebody. Labeling is dehumanizing. You haven't vetted it. You're the judge, jury, and executioner, even if the allegations are false. And then there is a lot of harm done by people who value wonderful things and are productive citizens in society, and we take them down because of an infraction.
Right.
Now, I do want to say that I do believe that there is a place for deplatforming, absolutely. And especially when you have people who are in positions of power and abusing that position of power to continue to harm, or literally harm, not
Yeah.
disagree with,
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
incitement is real, and the law says clearly that it's a crime to call fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire. If there is a fire, it's your duty to say fire to help other people. But, and I agree with you, I think it was really long overdue that Trump was kicked off of Twitter and other platforms. People say, but free speech. And I'm like, the lies are not free. And when they have a deleterious effect on people and move them to do violence, psychological violence as well as physical violence, it's a real problem for society. And we
Right.
need to incorporate, in my opinion, we need to incorporate an understanding of ethical influence and unethical influence,
Right.
and get back to truth and facts and evidence.
Right. Steve, I want to circle back to the experience of being publicly shamed for a second,
Of course.
because it's not something to take lightly. in my many communications with people who are going through this, the level of personal suffering is off the charts. The agony, the loss of life meaning, the loss of friends and community. Who can they turn to for support if all of their friends believe this horrible allegation and just cut them off without asking or seeing the facts? I mean, it's so all encompassing, your livelihood, your relationships, your ability to find love in the future, your job, your ability to get a new job, your what your children think of you,
Yep.
your physical body takes a toll. It when you go through this, it is massive, massive agony. Like it's not something you can easily shut off. You can't escape it. Every time you check your email, you're wondering if you're going to be attacked. Every
Mm-hmm.
time you go on social media, you're sick to your stomach. You want to avoid it. It's everywhere. And
Yes.
unlike a regular trauma that you can heal from because it's in the past, with media-based trauma, there are new wounds. They're not triggers, they're new attacks
Right.
every day. And you have to look forward to them in the future. So, how do you cope? How can you deal with this new life that you did not ask for? Well, one way is to see your life in the bigger picture. And we started to talk about that, how you have this story arc, just like with me. I thought my life was over. I thought that was my final chapter. When that happened, I
When the
thought,
media did that
yes,
misrepresentation of your story.
yes. And I thought, you know, everything that I worked for to build a beautiful life and to try to leave a legacy of goodness and kindness and helping others, it's all been dismantled by a media group that just needed another piece of content to get out there to get some Christmas bonuses.
Right.
So while they all went on their way, I I was, I was like laying on my couch dying. And that is how I felt. What helped me was unconditional love from my family, my friends telling me, reminding me all the time, Christine, the people that they're hating on is not you. That's not
Exactly.
you. If they knew you, they would love you. That
Exactly.
that is my message for anybody that has been or is being attacked by these haters. You feel this stigma when you go through this. You are marked. Stigma, by the way, is a marking. It's an ancient Greek word to describe like a brand, either by cutting or burning into a human being,
Yep.
usually a criminal, so that it sends a message to everyone else: stay away from this person.
Right.
And when you are publicly shamed and humiliated and misrepresented and canceled and all that, you get this stigma. How do you get it off you?
Right.
Well, what I learned in my study is that some people, everybody handles it differently, but different things that they used to heal included taking control of their own story, taking control of their media, putting out a list of the facts. Don't get emotional or defensive. Just make a list of the truth, like some bullet points of what really happened,
Mm-hmm.
so you don't have to repeat yourself all the time. You
Right.
could say, just go over here. Don't make it too complicated because then the brain won't remember it. Continue to be out there if you can for something else, because you still have the right to exist. You are not disposable. You are not somebody that deserves to be discarded. No one is. According to the philosopher Immanuel Kant, human beings are not meant to be a means to an end. They are ends in themselves. So they deserve to be treated with dignity, even if they've committed crimes, even if they're on death row. Human beings should be treated with dignity. That
Right.
is what I believe.
Right.
So
Me
remember
too.
that about yourself. You deserve to be treated with dignity. And And you are welcome. It you are welcome on this planet. What these people say during this public shaming campaign, whether it's just happening at your work or whether it's a massive thing, it's only their opinion. The rest of the world doesn't really know who you are unless you're some big celebrity, so we
Right.
catastrophize and we think that each negative comment represents 100 million people, and then you have, you know 1,000 comments. You think the whole world hates you,
Right.
but there are plenty of people who've gone through this who have more empathy and realize that you're a fuller human being than your worst mistake.
Right. So I want to just state that my perspective is there are millions and millions of Americans who've been deceptively recruited into a authoritarian cult or raised in an authoritarian cult, whether it's a religious cult, a political cult, a therapy cult, or just a very dysfunctional family unit that was very authoritarian. And for me, we need to destigmatize, to use that term, the idea as humans that bad things have happened, that we may have been involved. Like I was involved with a destructive cult that wanted to subvert democracy, thought it was satanic. And I fasted for Nixon. But that was the younger Steve who was in a cult that did these things. And life goes on, and talk about it as that's what happened then, and now I understand. And I guess I want to just state about cancel culture that for me, the problem is really authoritarianism, where the elite people who are the authoritarians are judging anyone who doesn't do what they do or believe what they believe, making them into objects, naming them, belittling them. And two concepts I want to just quickly mention from Robert Lifton's work, who studied Chinese communist brainwashing. One is demand for purity, and the other is dispensing of existence. And the demand for purity in a mind control cult makes one believe that if you just worked harder, then you would be okay. But you're never okay because no human being is perfect. So it's a constant shaming, guilting, making you feel less than. And that's part of what I see going on. Dispensing of existence is really completely on target because it basically defines an authoritarian cult as if you're a believer and you're in, you have a right to exist. And if you leave, you have no right to exist. So you can be canceled. And this, and Chinese communist brainwash, this is communism, right? This is left wing canceling. But then I want to say the right wing does canceling all the time too, by misrepresenting and getting the attack dogs to attack anyone that says something critical against their leader or their ideology. I want to invite everyone to step back and have a perspective of curiosity and respect. I want everyone to understand that people who've gotten deceived into the QAnon cult, for example, I think the media has done a terrible job with QAnon, calling it a crazy conspiracy theory or just pointing at only people who believe it are stupid or uneducated or financially troubled. That's not my research and my experience at all. And people are going to come out of QAnon and they need to be accepted again. And the way to accept them is to understand how they were unduly influenced online by powerful actors who understand psychological warfare. Because I do
Right.
think of it as psyops. Did you want to
In
say?
in every circumstance, I can't see where the best strategy is not kindness. If we treat them with kindness, if you're in QAnon, you're welcome to be my friend.
Mm-hmm.
If you are in Jehovah's Witness or Scientology or any group, I am here for you.
Yeah.
I have learned that when you try to attack, and this is a good lesson for everybody, but people don't change their minds based on facts or attacks.
Right.
They need to observe, they need to feel kindness. And not every thing about QAnon that is a conspiracy theory, and that's
Right.
where it gets complicated. And I don't think these people are crazy. I think some of the things that are in there have merit, and it gets mingled in with things that
Right.
have no merit. So there is no judgment from me if you're in QAnon, or from
Or me.
Steve.
Yep.
Yeah. And I also want to say, I love what you said, with being so warm and inviting. And if you have experienced being publicly shamed, humiliated, misrepresented in the media, made into a villain in a reality show, canceled, or, if you've experienced victim blaming or revenge porn or any of these things, I am here for you. I am still researching these situations,
Yep.
and my website is simply christinemarie.com. My Instagram is dr.christinemarie.
Yeah, we're going to put all of that in the
Oh,
blog.
that's great. Do reach out to me, because I am somebody that cares and will listen.
And I'd like to share a booklet that I just read by a progressive, Adrienne Marie Brown. We Will Not Cancel Us. And I just resonated 100% with her perspective about really separating your anger about injustice from individuals and really realizing there are human beings here, and that if we really want progressive change in a real way, we need to learn to live together. We need to listen to one another. We need to compromise and find ways to collaborate together. The future is collaboration and cooperation, not hatred and fear and division. But enemies of democracy want to sow division and hatred and fear. And so that's why I've been writing the books that I've written. I wrote The Cult of Trump, and I talk about fourth generation warfare, which is psychological warfare aimed at undermining experts, science, the legitimacy of institutions. And people are so fragile because of the pandemic and the economy and 4 years of Donald Trump. We really need to do a reset with positivity towards building a future together.
Right. And some people that are watching this might be offended because they love Donald Trump, and they, will have a knee jerk reaction to that. But to those of you, I want to say, you know, if you are a Trump supporter, you're, you're still my friend. You know, my family, they're all Trump supporters. I love them dearly. It's
Yeah, you're
you
bringing up a very important point, if I can interrupt you, and that I really want to say this, and that is that anyone who has blocked or stopped contact with anyone because they've believed in Donald Trump or because they've been anti-Donald Trump, find common ground, say I miss you, especially family members and friends, and find the humanity and the connection again.
right, absolutely. And I mean, Donald Trump is a very polarizing figure. He did do some good policies, prison reform, emergency use of, important medications, things like that. So, and at the same time, a single tweet, at the same time, a single, bullying tweet from Donald Trump has sent people into therapy because it has been just so traumatic. So, you know, I can see both sides here.
Yep,
And
but I'm gonna be bold or whatever and just say if anyone thinks Russia had nothing to do with Donald Trump needs to look at the facts. And if anyone believes Donald Trump won the election by a landslide, you need to look at the facts because both are not true.
Right. And
That's
that's really the message, think for yourself. That is the message. Think for yourself. Don't be pulled into the group think and when you
mhm.
live in this echo chamber of everybody saying the same thing, judge each person in each situation for what it is, but you can't be lazy. You have to do the deep
Right.
dive, and you have to risk letting go of something that's really important to you. For example, I was a pretty high profile anti-polygamy activist, and I was in the media a few different times explaining why polygamy needed to be criminalized. And I wrote many papers and blogs and gave talks about this. And when I immersed myself in a culture, I realized that being hateful towards the people that I want to help isn't the way to help them. And I took down my blogs, and I've had a more humanizing, empathetic approach, and as a result, I've been able to help 1,000 times more people who are living in plural societies than I would have ever been able to had I just stood up there and said, they're bad, they're awful, they need to
Right.
be shut down.
Right, and I think you're a saint personally. You live and have been helping folks in FLDS for many years, and just it's an amazing work that you're doing, and you have a heart of gold.
Thank you.
And I'll also say your daughter had me on her podcast
Yes, that was
about
awesome.
cults. We can put
Yeah.
a link in the blog to Lola's podcast as well. Any last message as we wrap up?
Yeah, let's treat each other with dignity and kindness. Let's do our own thinking,
Yeah.
and let's just fill this world with a whole lot more love and truth.
Yay. Thank you
It's a
so much for being you. And we'll put all kinds of links for people to get more information and your access to your resources. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Okay, great.
Thank you.